Affirmative, affirmative. It's time for Type 40, a Doctor Who podcast from the Spacebook for the Fandom Podcast Network. With me, Dan Hadley, Birmingham's King of the Geeks, and Tin Dog Lover, of course. Who isn't? If you're new to the show, or you've been travelling with us before, we're still the same irreverent, though always genial, non-gatekeeping show for everybody. Whatever decade or century you started watching, reading or listening along to the astonishing adventures of the Time Lord, our hero, Doctor Who. That TV series that's come to mean so much more to a huge amount of people, and we'll talk about it all on this show. Any and all opinions are welcome, thoroughly encouraged, and we've been known to have the odd laugh or two along the way. So come and step into our TARDIS and share this journey together here with us on Type 40. And we know the Doctor wouldn't approve at all if we wasted too much time. So let's lead them in now, our other voices on this edition of the show. Firstly, the original Hoonatic and long-time defender of the Doctor's cutest companion, Simon Horton. We're back in your happy place, aren't we?
Oh, Dan Hadley, we're back in my very, very, very happy place with this. You know me by now.
Yeah. Some of my earliest memories of you, Simon. Let's just get this established, because I think this expression is one that I always associate with you. Some of my earliest memories of you are of defending in arguments, conversations, debates. Debate is a friendlier word, isn't it? The merits of K9 against what you call the K9 knockers, in inverted commas. Do you want to explain what a knocker is?
Well, the thing is, K9 is one of those kind of Marmite characters in many ways, isn't he? And I think the people that love him absolutely adore him. Whereas there is this kind of... I think of it as a kind of a nouvelle view of K9, that he's a bit of a cheesy character. There's always this misconception, which you and I, Dan, have allayed several times, about that he only came about because of R2-D2 in Star Wars, and we've proven that he predates R2-D2. But there is still this school of thought that just says, oh yeah, he just came along because that's what all science fiction was doing at the time, was having a cute robot. And K9 is just so much more than that. And K9 is definitely, to me, one of those truly, truly iconic parts of Doctor Who. They're what make Doctor Who what it is, and it would be a lesser show without K9. And the fact that we've still got that legacy of K9 still ongoing to this day proves that the validity of the character and the love that people have for him. As I say, I think if you like K9, you absolutely adore him.
No, I would completely agree. I think he casts the maybe a short shadow, but quite a long one. I adore him. You clearly do, and so does he. Yeah, we've invited another fearless defender of K9 aboard. And if you've heard our Christmas party edition a few weeks ago, he was there misbehaving with all of us on that. But this is his first time on the podcast proper. It's our mate JT.
Hello, everybody. I'm here to celebrate the Tin Dog.
Yeah, that's it. And you're a real-life robot dog handler, aren't you?
I am, yeah. I managed, 2000, I managed to get a then marketable one from This Planet Earth. And he has been done up over the years, and he's better now than ever before. But it's because when I was a boy and K9 appeared, I wanted one. I wanted a robot dog. I think most of us at that age, I was about 7, I think most of us wanted a robot dog, so it took me all that time in order to get one.
And let's just clarify, because this is sort of the pinnacle of canine collectibles, really, isn't it? This Planet Earth. What is this Planet Earth, and what do they do? Are they still around?
I'm not sure if they are still around.
Yeah, they are still around, definitely. They're still making Daleks, still making Weeping Angels, Cybermen. But no canines. They don't make canine anymore.
Yeah, I do remember at the time they were saying that the amount that they made would be one-offs. And I'm not too surprised about that. But, you know, tomorrow's another day. You never know what might come along in the future.
I'm still desperate for this Planet Earth canine. I really am. I can't believe I missed out on getting one. I have emailed them on a number of occasions and said, will you please start remaking canines?
Yeah. Well, I have to say mine has been upgraded by a very talented model maker. It did need it. So I would like to thank Richard for all the effort he put into making it far more manageable. Let's put it that way. You know.
Could it be, though, JT, could it be that you were using him to sort of write down the shop sign every other day?
No.
Would that invalidate the warranty?
Well, yeah, in the days of a dog license, I think it would have gone across that.
Well, the good news is anybody out there who's listened to this show before will know that I love a pun or two, and I can't think of two better pals, get it?
Hey!
To have this particular conversation with, well, three when I count you. Yeah, before we get going, it's just a reminder that each and every edition of this show, past, present and future, is a tap or two away if you know where to look. And there's details coming up about all of that a little later on, as well as a joining with the matrix of all knowledge. To us, that's the Fandom Podcast Network, to hear about all the other fabulous shows over there. But yeah, let's blow the dog whistle now and enjoy K9's company.
Hey!
Part of the joy in discovering Doctor Who, discovering Doctor Who, I think there's some books called Discovering Doctor Who. Part of the joy of discovering Doctor Who are the little time eddies of its own, nooks and crannies, some mapped, some not, throughout the nearly 6 decades of Doctor Who history. There've been lots of talk of spinning off this great series from its very earliest days, and none of that came to anything for whatever reason. But if there was one creative, one producer who was hungry enough and showman enough to make that happen, it was the still new Doctor Who producer John Nathan Turner back in 1980. And one character, one focus that had captured the imaginations and hearts, the way that Simon was talking about earlier on, enough to sort of to guarantee a project like that, a production like that, any kind of success, then it was the Doctor's robot assistant K9, as created for the show as a one-off character by Bob Baker and Dave Martin, but becoming hugely successful on the show over several seasons with the Fourth Doctor. But perhaps the wisest choice when making this actually happen, inspired even, was in pairing K9 with Sarah Jane Smith, as played as ever by Elizabeth Sladen, as well as the unmistakable vocal performance of John Leeson returning as K9 himself. In case you've not seen it for a while, or maybe even not at all, here's a reminder of the magic of the pilot episode of K9 and Company, A Girl's Best Friend. Sarah Jane Smith is looking forward to spending a quiet Christmas with her Aunt Lavinia in the sleepy village of Morton Harewood. When she arrives, she finds her aunt is missing, and a surprise gift from an old friend is waiting to be opened. Sarah, K9 and her aunt's ward Brendan are swiftly caught up in the affairs of a mysterious cult who practice the black arts and are preparing to make a human sacrifice. Yes, this is a one-off story written by Terence Dudley, who'd been a producer and director on shows like Doomwatch and Survivors through the 70s. He directed a little of Doctor Who before, and he'd go on to write some more stories afterwards, but this was written by him, directed by John Black, produced by John Nathan Turner, who was still very much the firebrand new producer at the BBC at that point, bringing along Peter Howell, who was providing the music for this story. He just updated the Doctor Who theme itself, hadn't he, so brilliantly for this one-off story. Gentlemen, it saddens me, as a lover of K9 all my life, it really saddens me that this unique slice of Doctor Who, both in story and its place in the history, is often dismissed. usually before people have finished watching the opening credits. But I think anybody who will give it the time, give it that 50 minutes, will be really surprised by a confident and flavoursome production in its own right. It was tremendously exciting for me at the time. I was 6 or 7. I was mourning the loss of my favourite character from my very favourite show, JT. But we're now approaching, well, we're now beginning its 40th anniversary year. Can you believe this episode is 40 years old now?
No, and thank you for bringing that home, because I hadn't thought about that at all, and will immediately dismiss it from my head. I mean, it's a shame, really, that what you were saying there in the opening is if people can't get past the opening credits, because the brilliant thing about K9 and Company is when you watch it, it is what I would call a wholesome piece of British television from a then wholesome BBC, and it represents a real crop of talent that was going on in the corporation at the time. And it's made its way into one of my essential viewings every Christmas, because it is a Christmas special. It's the first Christmas special we got for Doctor Who, even though it's not Doctor Who. It's the first spin-off we ever got. It sets up what would happen 40 years later. It really just sets it up. And from a one-off point of view, it was amazing, and it was exciting at the time. And it's a shame that if people aren't going to get past the opening titles, they're missing out on a proper BBC drama.
I think, yeah. I mean, what you mentioned there, JT, is it cannot be overestimated, which is this idea that, as you say, it was the first Christmas special, long before the Christmas invasion, and it was the first spin-off. Nowadays we're used to Sarah Jane Adventures, we're used to Torchwood, we're used to those spin-offs, and it's just part of the. It doesn't mean anything to you. You're not fazed by it. But back then, the thought of a Doctor Who spin-off was literally the most exciting thing in the world, and it was unprecedented. It was unthought. No television show really had spin-offs in those days. So all credit to...
Apart from Happy Days.
Happy Days.
Seemed to have about 6.
Yeah, and that was American as well. I mean, I can only think of a handful in Britain. I can think of Porridge spinning it off into whatever it was called.
Going straight.
Seriously did. The Live Birds, I think, had a slight sequel, but it didn't really happen at all.
Didn't happen a great deal.
When this was announced, I read it through Doctor Who Monthly. I couldn't get over the fact, and that's when I realised what the term spin-off actually meant. This is coming at a very special time as well, because we've got to remember, for those people that weren't around as well, this was coming on the back of the 5 Faces of Doctor Who, a very important year for Doctor Who. Tom Baker had just relinquished the role. Peter Davison hadn't been seen yet. He was seen a week after K9 and Company was broadcast.
It's that close. I forget it was that close.
It was very close. We had the 5 Faces of Doctor Who broadcast in the November. Then we had Christmas, and as kids that was a big thing. Then in between Christmas and New Year, because K9 and Company was first broadcast on the 28th of December in 1981, you had K9 and Company and Castroval for episode 1. I mean, what a time to be a Doctor Who fan, a young Doctor Who fan as well, because you were just like, oh my goodness, what's happening? There was a real sense of newness and freshness emanating from this.
You're right that Christmas was such an important part of the K9 and Company story. I mean, nobody can see it, but today I am wearing my Christmas jumper. I've got my Christmas mug, because to me, K9 and Company absolutely is Christmas. I could certainly never watch K9 and Company any other time of the year, but that's because it is so intrinsically Christmas. And as somebody who loves Christmas, as JT, I agree with you. I watch it every Christmas without fail. It's part of my Christmas tradition. It's interesting because I mean that title sequence. I think we can all agree. Let's be honest. And the theme music. It's a misstep. They messed up with the title sequence and the theme music, but. Look, you have to cut it slack, because they were doing something entirely new. They were making up this concept of a spin-off on the hoof, as it were. They were just going with it. They were gamboling along. They didn't really. JNT, as you say, had barely been in the role for a year at this point. So they were learning as they went. And whilst you can now see that it was a bit of a misstep, the meaning behind it was good. I mean, for anybody that doesn't know this, the JNT's idea with the title sequence was he wanted the British version of Hearts to Hearts. The super high budget American show with Stephanie Powers in, and that's they were going for. And when you look at it in that context, you realise you could see what they were trying to do. They were never going to achieve it.
You're right. He wanted a sort of heart-to-heart, glossy type thing, but I don't think anybody around him understood what he meant.
I know exactly where he was going with that, because all those clips of Sarah Jane, there's lots of clips, aren't there, of Liz Sladen looking incredible, sort of kind of soft power dressing really, and sort of laying across this car and looking as if she was looking for something in the middle distance a lot, and lots of shots of her doing that in different locations. But what you usually get with shows like that, this is whether they're based in the States or whatever, and you get this sometimes now on the very few shows that do have title sequences, is they do that for a pilot episode, and then, because they've obviously it's a pilot, they've only got one episode made. So as the show gets on, and maybe it would get commissioned for a first series, they would get, say, 10 recorded, and they would intercut elements from those 10 episodes back into that title sequence to not to pan it out, but to give it that visual kick, a visual flavour of what to expect of the entire first season. And I think that's what he was trying to do, Simon. I think he wanted to capture people like that.
You can imagine, had they gone for the production on the first season, which is what they intended to do, yes, that title sequence would have become a really fast-paced action sequence using true Brit sequences from that first series, and that's what would have happened. And again, for anybody that doesn't know, this was absolutely J&T's intention. He wanted this to go to series. So much as J&T didn't like K9 within the Doctor Who show itself, and he kicked K9 out quite graphically.
Quite quickly as well.
Yeah, absolutely. All credit to him. He then absolutely picked up the reins, realised that K9 was a hugely successful character, and petitioned the BBC quite vociferously to get them to take it to series. It was only because the upper echelons of the BBC didn't buy it that it didn't go to series.
Bill Cotton commissioned it, of course, and then Bill Cotton was replaced by Alan Hart, who said no. Right. Absolutely, one of his first things was to say, under no circumstances that dog getting a show.
And of course, the tragedy of all of it is it got really good viewing figures, considering it was on BBC Two. Let's not forget, this was BBC Two, and it got 8.4 million. Oh, I do apologise. No, I'm looking at it. It was BBC One. 8.4 million viewers. Well, that's a decent return. And let's not also forget, within that, the Winter Hill transmitter in Bolton went down at 5 o'clock that day, which basically took out the whole of the northwest of England, a lot of southern Scotland. So a huge chunk of the UK, England and Scotland, never got to see it on its first transmission. So to get 8.5 million viewers with one transmitter down and a huge chunk of the UK gone, it was a ratings success.
Absolutely.
And it should have gone to series.
Isn't that more than the Five Doctors got?
Yes, it was more than Series 18 got. It was more than the Five Doctors got, which got 7.7, or around about that. And K9 got more than that. But I remember that evening very, very well, because my family we were in the Northwest at the time, and I was absolutely hyped. I was so excited about this thing. I wouldn't let anybody change the channel from BBC One. I was sitting there, and I remember the screen going blank, and I remember the scream for my dad. Just going, what's going on? And of course, my dad looked very technical by shifting the telly and doing things around the back. And I know he was
banging the television, basically. That's what we used to do. Bang the telly.
I remember him going next door. After about 10 minutes or so, he came back saying everybody's televisions are off, and that's when we knew something was going on. It was off for a couple of hours, as far as I know. So, I missed it. But that's one of the reasons that it generated a repeat the year after. And the repeat itself got around about 2.1, 2.2 million. And you can actually sort of say, you're absolutely right. If you could add the Northwest, the south of Scotland, that sort of stuff, everywhere that went out, you would have had maybe closer to 10 million people watching at 5:45 that night.
I think you would have got easily 10 million, JT, easily. And so that's what's just so frustrating, that it didn't go to series. One of the reasons that was given by sort of, as JT says, Alan Hart, who is now the new BBC One controller, one of the reasons that was given by him, and I do kind of buy this, is that was the format of the series too limited? For anybody that hasn't seen K9 and Company, poor show on you if you haven't seen K9 and Company. Give yourselves a treat and go and watch it, but wait until next Christmas. Because you've got to watch it at Christmas. But one of the reasons that was given is that there was the format going to be wide enough that the idea had been to sort of focus on what had been covered in K9 and Company, which is Sarah and K9 tracking down sort of kind of supernatural stuff in the Cotswolds area, demonology, all that kind of folkloric sort of stuff.
They had a mind to very much stay in that lane then, because that's only one prong of Doctor Who storytelling, isn't it?
That was the kind of initial thoughts for the series of K9 and Company, and I don't think there was a worry necessarily that there wasn't enough material within this idea of the supernatural, because so many series have proven that actually there is. I think the feel was that the pairing of K9 and Sarah themselves was a difficult one. As you can see from K9 and Company, it's difficult. K9 is the kind of character, he doesn't get around very fast. It's difficult for him. How do you get over this issue that Sarah is going around solving these mysteries and constantly trying to keep this tin dog secret, or do they just blow it open and bring K9 right into the fore? But then you've got this whole difficult question about everybody's going to want to know what this metal dog is. I see the difficulties with taking it to series, is what I'm trying to say.
Mm-hmm.
Because to us, let's not dab faint praise. 40 years ago, K9 looked like cutting-edge technology. If you saw something like K9 rolling down the street...
Well, let's be honest, 40 years ago, K9 was cutting-edge technology in a sense, because they had to keep refurbishing them and rebuilding them and keeping it up and, spending a fortune on the actual model, the actual prop. But, you knew there was no little person in that dog. You knew that was an actual robot. Yeah. And I think that's why so many of us fell in love with him, because he was a character to himself. He was one of the longest-running assistants to appear in Doctor Who, but he was also his own element. There was nobody in it, not like R2-D2, not like that Twinkie thing.
Do you think that some of the problems with the robot dog, I won't say the prop, I can't think of him like that, but with the robot dog, some of those little problems, the way he would waggle a little bit from side to side, the people handling him, the people working in the effects department at the time, and certainly the controller, the incoming controller of BBC One, for example, people such as that thought, oh God, it looks a bit naff. But to us, that added to part of the character, I think, Simon, the fact that he would wobble his little head.
Oh, without a doubt. I think that is part of K9's appeal. I mean, we've talked about this on the podcasts and videos before, about the genius of the design on the part of Tony Harding, and it is. And so I think absolutely. But I think the genius with K9 and Company, as you alluded to back earlier, is the pairing with Sarah Jane Smith, by far the most popular companion in the series up until that point. And let's not forget that originally this show was going to be called A Girl's Best Friend.
The entire show?
Yeah.
Didn't know that.
And it was only the upper echelons of the BBC that insisted on putting the K9 name in there. Now, I honestly think, as much as I adore K9, and you know how much I do, I think the star of the show undoubtedly is Elizabeth Sladen, because... by necessity, this is nothing against K9, it's nothing against John Leeson. By necessity, she had to lead the action because of the limitations of K9 as a prop. And so I think the mistake actually was calling the show K9 and Company. That I think that actually would have been better, potentially calling it the Sarah Jane Adventures, for example, to take pluck a title from the air. And I think had you gone down, had the series sort of pitched to go down the route that Elizabeth Sladen, Sarah Jane Smith was the star of the show. K9 was that kind of character, very similar to Mr. Smith becomes in the Sarah Jane Adventures. So K9 is absolutely there and is integral, but you keep him, for example, in the attic, in inverted commas, as they do with Mr. Smith in the Sarah Jane Adventures. I can see the show working. Let's be honest, we can all see Sarah Jane Smith, played by Liz Sladen, going around the Cotswolds as a kind of an investigative journalist / sleuth, solving all of these weird folkloric stories. It would have been a brilliant series.
I think it would have been. I do get what you're saying, but I understand why Bill Cotton and the other his team actually turned around and said to John Nathan Turner, "No, we want K9 in the title," because we have to remember when it was leaked to the press that K9 was leaving Doctor Who, there was an uproar in Britain. There was an absolute uproar.
I was one of the people making the uproar. I was.
Yeah. Well, you know, a load of us were in tears. A lot of letters were sent to the BBC. A lot of letters were sent to Doctor Who Monthly. It was on the front page of practically every paper going in the United Kingdom. And that's really where John went, oh, hello. And John Nathan Turner, being John Nathan Turner, he obviously saw the marketing element there. And so, oh, there's an audience for this thing.
So what you're saying is there was explicitly the plan, the whole creative process that put K9 and Company on screen was a direct result of the outcry from the viewing public, rather than what he'd always got in mind to do before he announced the departure.
Well, you have to look at. I mean, one of the beautiful things about K9 and Company was the elements of chance that came together to produce this one-off lovely episode, because K9 was leaving Doctor Who, brouhaha over that. John saw an opportunity, suggested the fact that there could be a one-off spin-off here. Bill Cotton loved that idea because, you know, he loved anything that was creative and artistic, and he was very supportive to his teams and his artists and everybody around him, as the BBC was in those days because of his attitude. Also at that point, John had been in communication with Liz Sladen for quite a while to bring her back into Doctor Who. I know Graham Williams had approached her previously as well, but John more so because Tom Baker was leaving after 7 years. He wanted a familiar face for younger viewers especially to transition between Tom Baker and Peter Davison. And Liz, of course, didn't want that. She had no interest in that at all. She turned him down on a couple of occasions. So when he went back to her to say, well, how about you be the Doctor? And lead the show, and K9 will be your companion. She, of course, turned around and said, let's talk, let's develop this, because it was taking Sarah forward, it was taking her. And as Liz often said, she didn't want to go back into Doctor Who just for that period, just to play something she'd played before. She would have been worked out of the show, either story 2 or story 3 of Davison's time. So there was no point in her being there, really. But John was so keen to work with her. It would have been
such a functional thing. Obviously, she'd have been remunerated for this, but it would maybe not have done her career the best of favours when, to be fair, you know, Liz Sladen had struggled to make a big mark. She'd had a lot of little parts on television, but hadn't had a big follow-up part since Sarah Jane Smith, so it could have done her more harm than good.
You know, Liz often said that one of the reasons she turned it down, there were a number of good, solid reasons why she turned John's offer to go back into Doctor Who down. But she almost said, I'm paraphrasing, she always said, well, why would I do the same role as I did between Pertwee and Baker?
Yeah, it's exactly the same. The timing would be the same.
But I do understand why John went to both Liz and then allegedly he went to Lou Jameson sometime after, because he wanted that familiar face. In hindsight, that would have been a mistake, because you were bringing in a new era. You had Adric Nissa, Tegan, and a new Doctor, and that was their show then. That was moving forward.
Simon, I watched K9 and Company just a couple of weeks ago from when we were recording this.
Hooray!
And I didn't do the big Christmas thing the way you two guys did. I don't quite associate it so closely with Christmas as you do. But I did watch it again, and I loved it. But one of the things that struck me the very most, and I think because since the last time I saw it and this time, we've lost Liz Sladen and other things have happened within Doctor Who itself. So watching this now and looking at what Liz Sladen does, it's a definite evolution from what she was doing when she was on Doctor Who before. And I think that because of the kind of actress that she is, not just the kind of character that Sarah Jane was, but because of the kind of actress that she is, she seems to be able to capture this childlike quality within Sarah Jane Smith. And she could do it when she first joined the show with Pertwee. She did it in this. Yeah. She did it in the Sarah Jane event. She kept on doing it. And here, there's something about the way she plays it in this. It could have worked better. But she's a great identifying figure for children watching, even in the lead role, isn't she?
She's stunning. I mean, what's interesting is that you look at, for example, when Billie Piper came back into the show to play Rose, she's gone on record as saying she struggled with that. She struggled to find Rose again. She struggled to get back into the role. You can see that she's not necessarily struggling to find it, but it's not coming easy to her. Liz Sladen hits the ground running in K9 and Company, and she hasn't missed a beat. She just falls straight back into that character. Maybe because she played it for so long, and certainly a lot longer than Billie Piper played Rose, or maybe she's always said, Liz Sladen always used to say she absolutely was that character. She related to that character. She understood the character. She loved the character. That's the big thing, and you can see the love for her and the way she's developed from when we left her at the end of The Hand of Fear. The way she's a matured character. She's still the Sarah Jane that we know and love, but she's matured somewhat. Liz Sladen herself sort of said she was unhappy with some of the choices that were made for the character in K9 and Company.
But it was a pilot, wasn't it? So that could have been refined.
But certainly at the script stage, I know she wrestled some of that around, and she insisted on some changes at script stage for things that she just felt were inappropriate for Sarah Jane to be doing. But as a result, she brings a very, very a very rounded character to the screen, and B, just an utterly adorable, lovable character to the screen. She lights up, as I say, this is taking nothing away from K9, but she lights the screen when she's on in K9 and Company. And let's not forget, she is the lead in that show in the way that the Doctor is the lead in Doctor Who.
Absolutely.
She's the lead in that show, and boy, does she lead. She is a leading person in that show.
In between the last time we saw her in The Hand of Fear and this, JT, she's clearly, taking things quite seriously. She's gone for martial arts lessons, hasn't she?
Well, allegedly. That's in one of the last scenes. One
of the bits she was unhappy with that was...
The thing about this was Liz knew Sarah. I once heard her say that she had actually said to John Nathan Turner, this is where I see Sarah being, and they had to have a discussion about it because she brought a lot to the table, and that's absolutely fine because Sarah is and was her character. She knew Sarah better than anybody else can before and since. So, but the brilliant thing that Liz got hold of with the whole thing of K9 and Company is she was the lead, as you say, and here she was reacting to this gift from the Doctor. Now that puts a brand new spin because there's that lovely line there where she's obviously gone about her business. She's become a successful journalist. She's very compos mentis, as she says in the show, and she's highly regarded in her industry. She's traveling all around the world, probably causing trouble. And then she comes back for a very quiet Christmas period. And there, after so many years sitting in an attic in Croydon, is a gift from the one man who she has thought has forgotten her. And that really boosts Sarah's character, that boosts her confidence, that boosts her awareness, that boosts her love for the Doctor. She becomes more embroiled with the fact he's still alive, he's out there somewhere, the Daleks haven't got him, he's okay.
You see that flicker in her eyes, don't you? You can see all that in Elizabeth Sladen's performance.
Beautifully played,
You're
and
right.
only Liz Sladen could play that scene because it harkens back to a line, of course, in The Hand of Fear. Oh, Doctor, you didn't forget.
That's
because
right.
She tells the Doctor in The Hand of Fear, don't forget me.
That moment, as you say, as Liz Sladen says, "Oh, Doctor, you didn't forget." I mean, it still sends goosebumps down me now. It's a magical moment, and I have to be honest. I mean, we've sung the praises of Bob Baker and Dave Martin many times on this show, and I still think it's an absolute tragedy that they didn't go back. That J&T didn't go back to Dave and Bob and ask them to write this. It was a mistake, and John Nathan Turner admitted it. He cocked up. It was a mistake. They should have done. And I would have loved to have seen Bob and Dave's script for K9 and Company and their ideas for what they would have come up with. But I have to be honest, Terence Dudley's script, I think, is really good. It's a damn good 50-minute script. It rollicks along. It's got some mystery in there. It's got some of the direction, John Black's direction, bless it, just messes up. Unfortunately, certainly with the conclusion, with the finale, with the big reveal of who the baddies are, and you're actually sitting there saying, sorry, so who are the baddies? Because you can't tell from the camera angles.
Can't see them properly, can you? Yeah.
You can't tell who the baddies are. So there's some missteps with direction, but as a script, I just think it's a cracking script, and it captures that Christmassy essence.
Is it because it's got a touch of the Midsummer Murders about it? What we now associate with shows like Midsummer Murders.
I think so. Well, I mean that those opening shots in Morton Harwood when you see the house for the first time as Sarah pulls up in the car, it's undeniably Christmassy. You can't get away from it.
The other element as well from the style of the show is you can tell it's Doctor Who, but it isn't Doctor Who. It has actually moved that element on. It's a different crew working on the show as well, and there's that feel to it. So it's familiar, and yet it's a change. But that was part of the excitement of it as well. We said this is now Sarah's life. This is where she is. And of course, we've got to remember as well the joy of seeing Elizabeth Sladen back on screen as Sarah Jane Smith was immense. And it's beautifully done because you see Aunt Lavinia for the first time with Juno Baker. You see that whole sort of introduction first. And Liz doesn't come into it a la Doctor immediately. And I love that bit. It's that build-up where you're just sitting there saying, when's she getting there? And then they make you wait a little bit longer for K9.
They keep you waiting for that money shot, don't they? But with Sarah Jane, how you described her is perfect. She is more seasoned, and yet she still sparkles. She's still very, very, very youthful, and yet you can see that she's seen a great deal, that she's been able to join the dots in her life and progress to the point where she can take more on, well, physically, if you want to look at the old Kung Fu, but mentally and emotionally.
It is interesting that you say that because, you know, looking back at it, as I have done every Christmas for the last few years since it was available on VHS and then DVD, you know, you can actually see Sarah Jane in that bit. She is a bit, I mean, Juno Baker says she's being prickly, and she absolutely is. She's being prickly because, you know, suddenly she gets back to Morton Harwood. Now, any normal person, when they've been told, well, your aunt had to go off earlier to do this thing she's got to do, and it's in the paper and all this, Sarah automatically thinks something's going wrong and something's afoot because she hasn't had a phone call or anything like that. And I think, hang on a minute, she's at that point now where maybe she's slightly suspicious of everything because of her experiences. It's an interesting point, I think, I look at in Sarah there, because any one of us would say, oh, where's my aunt? Oh, she had to go off to this conference first. Oh, right, okay.
It's a reading of the character and of that situation that I hadn't noticed. But again, I think you're absolutely right, and I think some of that must be in the room. You were talking about a minute ago, Simon, about Terence Dudley's script, and I agree with you completely. I think you could look at it as being sort of pretty standard whodunit. I won't even say run around. It was more of a walk around, a standard story, a standard episode. But it leaves people room to do stuff like that, to do the things that wouldn't have been in the script, to do the things that would be instinctual, and to do the things that could maybe be picked up a little bit later on. I want to talk about looking at John Black for a moment, the director. I think what I had forgot, I always forget that John Black did this, and he'd done The Keeper of Traken the year before on Doctor Who, hadn't he? And I see the same quality here, the texture and the kind of things that people are wearing. It's got that about it.
You're right. I mean, we should take a moment to talk about the overall production design of it, because I think it's beautiful.
It's beautiful,
the sets, particularly the set of Morton Harwood.
The staircase.
It's just absolutely magnificent. It's beautiful. It's as good as anything that you would see in, for example, Midsummer Murders, to take your mention earlier on, Dan. The sets are great. The costumes generally are great. I've got to take a moment to talk about Sarah's tweed ensemble. It is one of the most utterly divine costumes I have ever seen in any form of Doctor.
With that little aeroplane on her collar? That's so the Doctor.
I just, you know, this has got, really, this is sounding extremely trite, but I adore that costume of Liz Sladen as well, because it's the way she's got the blouse, she's then got the hacking jacket, there's then a separate bit that goes on the top of that, there's then a cloak that goes on the top of that.
Liz wasn't fond of that particular outfit, but I actually love it because it says to me, here's Sarah in the country, winding down, she's got a lovely silhouette that John wanted.
Correct.
And it's certainly suited the sort of action sort of thing that was coming. Because I reckon that had it gone to series, it would have been more Agatha Christie than Doctor Who.
Well, this is my observation about it, that we get a lot of costume changes for one character in this episode, and I think that is part of the nature of a pilot. Everything about this was a pilot. I think it wasn't just a pilot as to see how the viewers responded. I think creatively it's a pilot as well. We'll try with this look, we'll try with that look.
Oh, certainly.
What's interesting is that tweed outfit that she wears through probably about half of it is just a very, very doctorish outfit. I don't know whether it was a deliberate thing on their part, but it is very, very doctorish. Yet again, Sarah, as the lead, as the star of this show, it leaves you no doubt at all. This is the character you should be watching.
And it can't be any coincidence that that's the outfit that she wears in the publicity pictures, can it, JT? You know,
well, it is. I mean, all the pictures of the time are in that outfit. But it was actually, we've got to remember, it was very 80s. Suddenly, in the early 80s, women were wearing suits, they were wearing ties, they were wearing shirts. And there was Sarah leading that, as Sarah Jane Smith would do because of her character then. And I think the whole thing about Sarah's fashion, I mean, when you look at what she turns up with in a couple of years later, the Five Doctors, I mean...
She looks like somebody who's just been caught on her way back from Iceland in that, doesn't she?
Yeah.
It's not got the same...
Do we know what happens to that tweed outfit from K9 and Company? If anybody out there knows where it is, I'm praying to goodness it actually is still in existence. I'd love to see it.
I mean, we can't underestimate the importance of. I mean, none of them knew. I mean, yes, we know that JNT always said to his dying day. He always said, "No, this was a one-off." But you know that in his mind he was going, "I want a series out of this. I want to be a producer that's producing 2 series at the same time based around it." You know he wants.
Of course,
I'm sure he was gutted that he didn't get that, but. It was K9 and Company that set the precedent for what was to happen. So Sarah turns up with K9 in the Five Doctors a couple of years later. And then that, so many years later, and I don't want to admit how many years later it was, also set the precedent. I mean, you mentioned the Sarah Jane Adventures. There she is with him again. The continuity was then established. You know, Sarah and K9.
It changes her destiny, doesn't it? Not just in that respect, but in who the character is.
Well, eventually, of course, it's K9 that will eventually lead them back together, the Doctor and Sarah back together, and that may have also happened back in the day had they gone to another city. You don't know. I mean, John would have had a field day with continuity and how many guest stars and how many leading people he would have got into a particular. Can you imagine the names he would have lined up?
The guest stars of the series would have been like nothing you can imagine.
It would have been glitzy. Then it wouldn't have been necessarily a kids drama because your lead would have been. But
I mean, I agree with you, and I don't feel that K9 and Company is really a kids drama. It's very adult. Yeah. It challenges very adult themes.
All this talk about Christmas, I think, okay, Christmas has been and gone now, but listen to this. Here's a quick trip back in time for a bit of the flavour of K9 and Company back in 1980.
Christmas on BBC One. Tonight, Elizabeth Sladen stars in K9 and Company.
K9! Well, what do you think it does?
Well, we could try asking it.
Shump. We're taking it for a walk next. Hey,
Mistress!
Don't muck about.
It wasn't me.
I spoke, Mistress.
What?
I am K9 Mark III.
Mysterious occurrences at Morton Harwood and suspicious circumstances cause concern for K9 and his new friends.
A dog! A dog belching fire! It got Peter! It got my son! I swear by Arianrod!
Bizarre happenings in K9 and Company, tonight at 5:45 on BBC One.
Yeah, fantastic stuff. I can feel my mother's old frock wallpaper when I think back to those times, and this sort of electric fire that she used to have that sat next to the TV. The cast of K9 and Company, everybody, it was filled out with proper sort of how can I put this, full-voiced British thesps, wasn't it? Some trusted hands and familiar faces from all sorts of other shows. Looking down the list here, we've got Bill Fraser as Bill Pollock. He'd been in Doctor Who the previous year. Colin Jevons was there as George Tracy, with Nigel Gregory as Vince Wilson. Sean Chapman was Peter Tracy. Linda Poland was Juno Baker. Fantastic name for a character, Juno Baker. I've always loved that. Neville Barber, pure Christie. Neville Barber was Howard Baker, with John Quarmby as Henry Tobias and Gillian Martell as Lily Gregson. These all sound like made-up actors' names from Toast of London. And then we had Mary Wimbush as Aunt Lavinia, who gets a lovely scene towards the end, but wow, she's got such presence there. All those actors, they're feasting on this material. They know what to do from the get-go, and yet they don't. Somehow, Simon, they don't send it up, do they? The one character that sort of stayed with people, that stayed with the fans over all the decades, and copped a little bit of flack, it has to be said, it's Ian Sears as Brendan, isn't it? Aunt Lavinia's ward.
Yeah. I mean, gosh, I have to be honest. I remember sitting there watching it in 1981, and even as a how old was I then? 11. As an 11-year-old, I remember not being blown away by Ian Sears' acting ability. I have to be perfectly honest.
What do you trust that?
But bless him, what an awful part to be given. I think he definitely has by far the hardest parts to play in the whole thing. And in all honesty, he does as good as anybody would have done.
He's very game, isn't he, JT? Very game.
He'll throw himself into it.
Do you know what? I think it's terribly unfair that Ian has had flack from certain fan centres, and it's a tradition in science fiction to find the youngest male lead and slag him off. Matthew got it. That chap from Star Trek got it. What's his name? Will Wheaton. He got it. Yeah. You know, I think it's a tradition to do that. And part of me thinks it's just supreme jealousy that it's not you in the show.
I think that's what it is. In fact, I'm positive that's what it is.
Yeah, but I think as well. I mean, I just remember being in awe of this show and just watching it and just taking in and enjoying every single second of this, thinking, oh my God, this is different. And the Doctor's not going to be in this. And there's Sarah. Oh, and there's K9. And there's Juno Baker. She's obviously the baddie. Oh, no, hang on a minute. It's Lily Gregson. She's looking a bit. But she's giving Sarah a cup of tea, so she's all right. And it was that element there. And from when Brendan came into it, I didn't mind him at all. I thought, well, this is obviously Sarah's companion.
I kind of feel that, as I say, his character is the least well served by the script. I've just praised Terence Dudley's script, and I do think it's a cracking script. But unfortunately, I think Brendan fares the worst with regards to dialogue.
Yeah, you had to have someone, Simon, though, to actually sacrifice, didn't you? And I love the fact that he just plays the traditional damsel in distress. And
of course, what's interesting with Brendan's character and the sacrifice that you mentioned there, JT, and this goes to show how adult and serious they were actually taking the show, was at script stage, Brendan's character would have been completely naked as he was led to sacrifice. And it was only, again, I think the upper echelons kind of said, well, you're going to have to put something on him. But seriously, I'm not kidding you, he was going to be naked.
I thought you were going to say that they were going to actually kill him at the end then, and we were going to get somebody else different from the main.
Oh, no, she was going to save him, but there was, I mean, I think I've also heard somewhere on the circuit in the past as well that what they actually put him in was the best of bad ideas, because yes, he was supposed to be naked, and I'm sure poor Ian Sears would not have liked that at all. But then they said to him, put him in a nappy type thing, which I think was
never lived that down. Martin Clunes, he knows that.
But yeah, but even the thing they actually put Ian into eventually is a little bit risque, isn't it? And God knows where they got that from. But really, I mean, they should have just put him in a sack.
And again, you just feel so sorry for him, because that night, you know, the legend has it that night shoot in the ruins with the sacrifice was absolutely freezing, and he's wearing next to nothing.
He troops on.
Absolutely, and there's that wonderful story with all of the acolytes of Hecate going round the sacrificial stone, chanting Hecate, 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 and apparently by 4 o'clock in the morning, all the extras were actually chanting equity, 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 because they were so cheesed off that they were freezing their bits off.
Absolutely, and I don't think that was down to any fault with K9 either. I think it was just getting it all in the can and getting it done. And if Ian is actually listening to this, great legs.
I agree.
In between the repeat screening of this in '82 and whenever it came out on VHS, which was around 1994, 95, I didn't see this story at all. You know, it lived in my memory. The thing that stayed with me the very, very most was that chant. Even Simon's rendition of it gave me the chills, that Hecate, Hecate, Hecate. Always stayed with me. You know, that was over a decade in between where I didn't set eyes on a minute of this thing.
But do you not find it still with you now? I mean, you're absolutely right. I remember watching some American thing back in the early 90s, which was about something to do with the occult and something like this. It was one of those movie things they produced for television, you know?
Yeah.
And they were praying, or they were worshipping Hecate, and all I could think of was that chant.
So for all that the script probably doesn't do, and all the things that, you know, just a matter of reality, the fact that this was a pilot, it couldn't be all things to everybody. And Ian Sears, I'm sure he would have got much more lines in various episodes had the series gone on. For all the things it didn't do, moments like that do really stay with you. You know, I was absolutely completely the target audience for this. That 7-year-old who had to play up a little bit to watch it because it looked a little bit too scary. But yeah, the fact that it stayed with me for over a decade, yeah, I think it's certainly brought more to Doctor Who than it ever took away as one of this great failure that sometimes gets trotted out even now on clip shows for shows that were never going to work. I think this absolutely, definitely could have worked.
Oh, if I see, put me in touch with the people who put that on, so I'd like a word with them, because this was in no way a failure. I mean, it got over 8 million viewers. And part of the country.
You know what tabloids are like, though, don't you? I don't just mean tabloid journalists. I mean tabloid TV as well. They use shorthands for everything. If something was big and they tried something, and particularly in Great Britain, we do like to build people up and then knock them down. And they tried this and it didn't work. Ha ha ha. And that's never been something that I've subscribed to, or something I've always tried to resist. And you do find that K9 and Company does continually make up these shows.
It is important to Doctor Who lore on so many platforms that we have started to talk about. The first ever spin-off, it brought 2 incredibly popular characters together for the first time on television. It set the scene for the characters 30 years later, and where they would be. It has kept both of those characters alive, and certainly through the wilderness years of Doctor Who, K9 and Company was always, Sarah and K9 were together then. In
comic strips, in
books. I mean, it's such a shame.
And at the end of the day, taking the Doctor Who connection away entirely, that's why we're here talking about it, because we love Doctor Who, but you take that away entirely, and actually it's still a completely decent piece of BBC drama, BBC festive drama, that you could have put that on with no Doctor Who connection whatsoever and just had an investigative journalist trying to get to the roots of this witch cult, and it would have been a perfectly decent Christmas Eve show for BBC any other time. So
it's weird that you said that, because when I was rewatching it last week, I actually thought that. I thought, wouldn't this be great if the BBC, and they won't, but if the BBC had stuck this on Christmas Eve or a couple of days before, I would have loved to have seen the response for viewers today watching it at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, just at Christmas. I think it'd be very interesting to see that, because I reckon people would have gone, "There's K9." Oh, well, what's that?
I think it's perfect. I think it's perfect tea time Christmas Eve fare, and I think actually it was robbed somewhat by being buried on the 28th of December for its first transmission. I think it could so easily been on over the Christmas weekend, weekend itself.
In my head, I'd convinced myself it was on Christmas Eve or Boxing Day. Certainly a lot.
That was the repeat. Dan, the following year was on Christmas Eve.
That could be why.
And one of the reasons they gave it the repeat, of course, was because half the country didn't see it, and there was no playback. There was you couldn't go to an iPlayer, you couldn't go to a video, there was no DVD release. So a lot of the people that couldn't see it because the Winter Hill transmitter went down had to wait an entire year. And I think that's why, you can say, well, 2.2 million who tuned in for the repeat could possibly have been tagged on for the first year. So you could have got closer to 10 million for that first year.
Talking about this with you guys, and in context, and hearing you both know a lot more about this episode than I do. And so putting it into context like that, it's made me look at things slightly differently. Reflect on my own responses. For example, Simon, you were talking about John Black's direction, and particularly the conclusion there. I'm going to confide something to you now. I watch K9 and Company only every 3 or 4 years, and in the time in between, I always forget who has done what. Who are actually behind this plot? I always forget in between, and I think that's why I always enjoy it, because it always surprises me. Now, I thought that it was just me not being brilliant with detective. I don't watch detective stuff. Things like that. I'm not great at picking up on clues and things like that. So I thought it was probably an area in which I'm lacking. But it turns out, from what you've said, it was just not directed very, very well. But I view this as a positive, you see, because it does mean that every time I see it, I am always surprised, and it never sinks into the mundane and the predictable based on that. I always enjoy it. The coziness and jeopardy, it's always balanced right in the middle. I'm in my 40s now. I was less than 10 years old when I first saw this, and it still has a power. The thing that I was disappointed about then is also the thing I'm still disappointed about now. It's also the thing that marks it out as being not Doctor Who, because if this was Doctor Who, we would have seen at some point the true manifestation of Hecate. We never see anything of that, do we? We never see like a Zal or anything sort of spirit its way into existence like that. And even now I think that's a shame. I can see why they didn't do it, but I think it's a shame, JT.
Well, yeah, but part of it was it had to be different. And what's good about that, what you've just said there, is the fact that, you know, this is human. These are human beings.
Yeah,
the whole point of this
important
story is the fact that these are people in the English countryside of yesteryear, who and you know, and it still goes on to a certain extent in certain elements today, where people believe traditions, especially in farming, especially in rural. I'm not saying all of it, but there are elements where tradition has been passed down, and that's one of the things what I don't miss in this episode of K9 and Company, because this was a good old-fashioned, in a sense, take the mask off, Scooby-Doo style, that's the villain. And it was all about the human element. I think that's where, you know, later on, when Russell obviously comes in, he builds the sci-fi element into it. I would expect, and I don't know, had they gone to a series, I would have expected a certain sort of Agatha Christie style whodunit type thing going on, but maybe they would have got there eventually. But I think that's where K9 and Company actually works now, because the only off-world element you have is K9.
I have literally, until you have just said what you have said, Dan, I've never, ever even registered that there is actually nothing truly supernatural or sci-fi in there. It is human. Never missed it. I literally never missed it until you've just pointed it out to me. So it certainly never bothered me at all that as an 11-year-old, that there was nothing sort of science fictioning there. I just accepted it for what it was, and that it was totally human and down to earth, and that's what it was.
And after what JT's just said, I'll have to admit it now, I can never remember who the villain is in Scooby-Doo either. But that's definitely just me.
In K9 and Company, it was everybody, of course. Except the bakers.
Again, very, very Agatha Christie, very Orient Express. Another thing I do like, and I think it harkens back to those ambitions of being a bit like Heart to Heart, it's the final scene, that sort of cosy wrap-up that we get. They're all sort of huddled around the fire. Now, if that had been Heart to Heart, or the Fall Guy, they'd have been in the hot tub or something, but I don't think anybody really wanted to see that. I'm happy with it as it is. All Christmas crackers and funny hats and K9 singing "We Wish You a Merry Christmas." Who couldn't fall for that? And John Leeson does it beautifully, doesn't he?
And a satin blouse for Liz Sladen that apparently cost about half the budget, and only gets used in one scene.
Right?
No, you're right. That final scene is just absolutely Christmas essence, just squashed down into one 90-second scene, and it's beautiful coda.
You know, the whole thing about K9 and Company, it was wholesome, then BBC entertainment. Playing the trailer earlier, that for me is really special, because that shows the BBC back then how it was, when they weren't afraid to show a bit of tinsel and a bit of glitter and make things really festive, whereas now you get it all planned and it's all very corporate style, I believe. But you know, back then they were quite happy to show things with bits of holly around it and have a long tail of them, and you know.
Well, back then, JT, the BBC was wearing its Auntie Beeb very proudly on its sleeve. I don't doubt it would hate to be called Auntie Beeb now, but back then it very much was Auntie Beeb. And I think you can see that literally running all the way through K9 and Company. You watch K9 and Company, and that was what the BBC did well: a wholesome, solid drama. That's where they excelled.
Absolutely. And of course they wouldn't have known necessarily with K9 and Company who was going to watch it, because you know you would think that the Doctor Who fans were going to watch it, and hence I reckon the time of 5:45 on a particular December, that show could have been earlier. But I always believe that this point of Christmas, between Christmas and New Year, is a sort of limbo period. Some of the times, you know, the best quality well, not so much these days, but you used to get some really fine films, some really fine productions to watch. So to have K9 in that element there is actually quite exciting, I think, because it was showcasing really just before New Year. And certainly I know I was really looking forward to it from Christmas Day onwards. Oh my God, K9's next. But it also tied in, as I said earlier, that the week after, you got the new Doctor coming in, so there was a sort of planning element to it there. Also, as I keep harking on about it, it got people watching, but we don't know necessarily who. It wouldn't have. I mean, it could have been all fans.
I think that from what you've just said, I think we all mentioned it earlier on, this precise moment in Doctor Who's history, it was almost like a perfect storm. From the Five Faces, the departure of this leading man, looking to the future, and an actual spin-off. Now, I remember at the time, it felt, because this is the time where my fandom was just beginning, and it felt like I was getting on board with something that was a lot bigger than I ever realised. It's time for a quick break now. because Type 40, a Doctor Who podcast, is a Spacebook production for the fabulous Fandom Podcast Network, but we'd be letting you down if we didn't fill your ears with talk of the other fabulous shows on that network. Here's a quick word about all of that, and we'll be back in a tick and a tock with more talk about K9.
Thank you for listening. We hope you're enjoying this podcast. We like to continue to feed your ears by inviting you to listen to the Fandom Podcast Network and all of the other awesome shows we have to offer. It starts with our flagship show, Culture Clash, our weekly pop culture news podcast. Blood of Kings, our Highlander podcast. Couch Potato Theater, our podcast celebrating our favorite movies. Time Warp, the Fandom Flashback podcast discussing a year in movies and our favorite pop culture topics. End Zone, the NFL podcast. Good Evening, an Alfred Hitchcock podcast. Union Federation, our Star Trek and Orville podcast. Hair Metal, the 80s and early 90s rock metal podcast. Type 40, our Doctor Who podcast. Lethal Mullet, a 1980s and 90s action film podcast. What a Piece of Junk, a Star Wars podcast. And our newest show, Making Treks, a new Star Trek podcast with a deep dive into the final frontier with host Mark Newbold and Adam P. O'Brien. You can enjoy all of these great Fandom Podcast Network shows on our master feed at fpnet.podbean.com. Fandom Podcast Network is also on Apple Podcast, iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, Spotify, and iHeartRadio. You can also find us on Facebook under Fandom Podcast Network. You can also email us at fandompodcastnetwork@gmail.com. You can also find us on Instagram and Twitter under Fandom Podcast Network. Thank you for listening, and remember, respect others and enjoy your fandom.
Yes, we've teased and tantalised you there. Now let us clothe you too. Head over to tpublic.com, search for the Fandom Podcast Network, and you'll find a store full of the team colours for all those shows on t-shirts, hats, mugs, and a TARDIS full of other items. Treat yourself, treat your other selves, and it all goes to support the network continuing to fill your ears with 100% fabulous fandom goodness. Yeah, looking at the music, we've talked a little bit about the theme tune, and as this conversation's gone on, I think what I've realised as well is that if the show had have gone the way that you talked about there, Simon, and the ambitions that they had for it, JT, I think that as the show would have developed, that theme tune would have probably suited it a little bit more. But Peter Howell produced all the incidental music for this show, and he'd reinvented the entire sound of Doctor Who the previous year with the synthesizers and whatnot, and he brings all that to K9 and Company here, but sort of brings in a Celtic sound which again seems right for Christmas. This was so exciting as well, wasn't it? Just hearing a show like this, it all sounded really fresh and really electronic. People use that as a cliche when it comes to the 80s, I feel, but it doesn't mean that it's not true, does it, JT?
Oh no, absolutely. I mean that was the score of the time, and for those of us that were around, Doctor Who was reflecting very much what was going on in the charts at this point. I refer to this whole thing in Britain as the Brideshead Revisited era, because that drama had a massive impact on so many people, and everybody was going around with big haircuts, floppy haircuts, pastel colours, floral prints. Listening to things like the Pet Shop Boys, Erasure, Yazoo. So many things were going on. But Doctor Who, I mean, this is one of the things that John did. He just moved it on from Tom's last season onwards. And of course, he did the same with K9. He was going to go to some of the people's. Dick Mills, the wonderful Dick Mills, did all the sounds. And then, of course, the Radiophonic Workshop, who was there for him to use. Of course, he was going to bring them in.
What you've just said about Brideshead Revisited and all those dramas, Simon, do you remember all that time, Chariots of Fire, that had just come out? Yeah. Matthew Waterhouse, when he'd gone into Doctor Who, he'd been in a show called To Serve Them All Our Days. All that kind of drama was really popular. And Ian Sears, the Brendan character, with his tweed jacket and his very sensible haircut, he belongs kind of to that world too, doesn't he? I think it's linked. You can see it just as JT describes.
Oh, absolutely. It is a product of its time. K9 and Company is a product of its time. Anybody that watches it now for the first time will undoubtedly think it looks somewhat dated. But on the other hand, I actually think it's rather timeless. I don't think it's dated at all badly. Okay, that the pacing is slower, as you have joked quite fairly, Dan. It's a walk around rather than a run around.
I love it for that, though. I do love it for
Absolutely. So the fact is, no, it doesn't stand up to today's modern sort of drama standards in that respect. But in the other respect, because of the direction they take it in and the style of production design and the scripting, I think to an extent it is somewhat timeless and actually has dated remarkably well. Given we are talking 40 years later, certainly if you look at something like The Horns of Nymon, which wasn't that much before K9 and Company, that's dated badly. K9 and Company hasn't dated badly.
Do you know, I think I absolutely agree, but I think that's where, and there will be certain people that won't really like this, but that's where the whole setting of K9 and Company works, because it's a then modern day United Kingdom, you know, and the story is obviously set. She even says, she gives the date, it's 1981. So it does set it. I really think as well, it is timeless and it holds its place. Sometimes with the television that you get today, it is so fast-paced. There are so many mistakes in it, whether it be continuity error or script errors or acting errors or whatever, because it's just bang, 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 bang. Sometimes you just want to watch something that's going to unfurl gently, and the best place to go for that is British television of yesteryear, who actually look at plot, who develop characters, who bring you into something, who are able to say to you, well, look, here's Juno Baker. And isn't she very, hello, how are you? She's obviously the baddie. And here's Lily Grigson, who's, oh, would you like a cup of tea, dear? Have a cup of tea. Oh, she's a nice friend to Sarah. And then twists it around. And that's the whole beautiful thing about television of yesteryear, because it was all about character. It was about the plot. It wasn't about bang, bang.
And also, K9 and Company is a real classic example of the BBC at the time, in that everything was in-house. This was what the BBC did. They made things. Let's not forget, we shouldn't forget, that K9 and Company was made literally just down the road from you and I, Dan, at Pebble Mill, BBC Pebble Mill in Birmingham.
I always forget that. I do.
We've got to remember this was made outside the environs of London, of Television Centre. So this just goes to show again the quality of programmes being made by the provinces at that time. Nothing is made by the provinces really to speak of, certainly overall by the BBC now. They make stuff in Manchester.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's about it. They make stuff in Manchester. There's certainly no production really goes on anywhere else in the country. And so K9, Cardiff, yeah, you're quite right. Yeah. But generally, all of the regions back in the day would have made stuff. And so it is this sort of time capsule in a way of what the BBC was back in the 80s.
Oh, I totally agree, and I think that's the effect I get when I watch it. Like when you watch those trailers that are included on the Blu-ray and what have you of the BBC trailers at the time. Yes, of course, they may last 10 days, and they're very, but that's how they were, and it brings back that, as I say, the word wholesome. But the thing about Pebble Mill as well is that they were so proud of K9 and Company. They were so happy to have that. I seem to recall a lot of, there used to be a magazine show called Pebble Mill at 1. Where the presenters would sit literally in the foyer of the BBC, remember, and they would interview guests and politicians from the. It's actually the template that the One show has nicked today. They would do that, but they were so proud of it that K9 appeared to talk about this on Pebble Mill several times, and I think he also appeared on their special show, when the New Year show or something like that. I can't really remember it now because it was on late, but I'm sure I've got it somewhere. And he was on that talking about it. I'm sure it was for the repeat actually. I think that was the other thing about it as well. Had it gone further, I think they would have made the most of having a lead BBC drama.
All of those clips have made it through to the DVD and Blu-ray release. You can find those tucked away in those box sets. You don't have to look too far. It's all there. It's all beautiful stuff. And yeah, you're right with that kind of television. John Leeson's in character as K9. Yeah, I love all that stuff. And I'd forgotten. Yeah, I mean that was the template for the One show. The One show started originally. That was filmed in Birmingham at the Mailbox, not that far from where Pebble Mill was. So it has that kind of legacy. Talking about K9 himself, it was his name above the door, shall we say? What do you think this did? Just as a look back through the time in between, it could have started off a whole series for K9 himself. Of course, eventually that did happen way later somewhere else. But this could have started off a whole new series. As it happened, it sort of represented a bit of a last shout for K9 himself. After this point, he was relegated for 20 years to kind of cameos, wasn't he? It's a great shame.
I don't think it relegated him in such, because of course he was still alive for fans. We never really went away.
Well, they're all alive for fans.
Yeah. I mean, but it also did the same thing for Sarah. I mean, the two of them crop up in the Five Doctors. Okay, K9 has a cameo because they couldn't actually get him into, the script properly, and that's fine. But he's there. It establishes the fact that those two are still having wild and manic adventures wherever they happen to be, which is brilliant. The popularity of both of them, both Sarah Jane and K9, cemented the fact that, when Russell certainly gets to that point and he wants to do a spin-off, where else would you go? That really cements the importance of K9 and Company all that time. And we did get the VHS coming out of that bit, which reinvented it again and brought it out to mind, and as you say, that was the early 90s. I'm sure that the video came out. 90s. Yeah, and that was the first time it had been seen by us as fans, because the BBC never repeated it after the first repeat. And on it goes, and and we're here now 40 years later talking about it. I mean, it's still there. So I think it kept the flame alive for anything coming back. And K9's one of those characters that he's not going to be forgotten. He's one of the longest serving companions in Doctor Who. He was the first character to be given a spin-off show, which then happened to bring Sarah Jane into it as well, but it was all based around K9.
Well, of course, the thing to remember is that K9 is one of the most, if not the most, instantly recognisable of all Doctor Who companions. For all the successes of Rose Tyler, of Liz Sladen, you name it, K9 is still obviously the most recognisable to the general public. I think if you showed a photo of K9 to most members of the general public, they'd know who he was. They'd roughly know, even if they're not Doctor Who fans, they'd know where he was from, Doctor Who, that he's called K9, and he talks with a silly voice. I think you'd assume that most people would know that. He's
one of the great copyrights. If you look at any Doctor Who merchandise to this day, the TARDIS, the Daleks, and K9.
That's right. He is, and in many ways, he's loved by people who don't necessarily love Doctor Who. So you don't have to love Doctor Who to love K9. Yeah, so there are people that I know that just love the idea of K9, love the aesthetics of K9, even though they don't like Doctor Who.
K9 was and is an icon. That flame is definitely still burning, and he's still rolling around somewhere, I'm sure. I can't believe that we've seen the last of any of those different marks of K9, past, present or future. That's probably a story we'll have to pick up at a later date. I've loved talking about this. The smile is on my face. The smile is on your two faces too. But before we go, let's score this. Let's award this. How many doggy treats out of 5 would you give K9 and Company, a girl's best friend, Simon?
Oh, do you really, really need to ask me? I'm going to give it 1,000,000 out of 5. I love K9 and Company more than you could possibly imagine. It's uncountable for me.
Yeah, have that one, Alan Hart. How about you, JT? What would you give this one out of 5?
I'm sure he's watching. I would agree with Simon. I mean, out of 5 out of 5. But it's just stellar. This episode, it's still magical. It's a Christmas treat. It's a show, as I said earlier, where things happened and things came together and something was produced because of elements that would never have really happened before. It's just a magical tale off the screen and on the screen. It's just stellar.
Can I just drop in my one little remarkable factoid that I found this out only recently, a few months ago actually, and my jaw hit the floor. And that was to discover that Sean Chapman, who of course plays Peter Tracy in K9 and Company, and for anybody that's trying to place Peter Tracy, he's the guy that speaks like this, and he's got the black leather jacket on, he's the wheel, he's the motorbike fan. And I found out recently that he plays Frank Marshall in Hellraiser, which I was gobsmacked to discover. So, and to begin with, I thought, no, that's not right. You go and look at Hellraiser, and this is, if you're of an age, certainly Hellraiser is up there as one of the great horror films, and Frank Marshall is one of the most terrifying zombie characters that you will ever see. And I was amazed to discover that little Sean Chapman from K9 and Company ended up in a star of Hellraiser.
Do you know what, Simon? You've inspired me there, because one of the things that has never really happened after all these years on the convention circuit, on the gig circuit, is the K9 and Company cast were never really approached. It was always Liz, and Liz had a lot to say about it, and John had a lot to say, John Neeson had a lot to say about it, but we've never really asked any of them to come along and talk about what they remember about it. Even the DVDs didn't really focus on that. Well, and I don't know if many, obviously a few of them are no longer with us, sadly, but there are certain ones that are still around, and it'd be interesting to get them on. So if any of our friends who are doing conventions anytime when we're allowed to do conventions, there's an untapped market. Let's see what they thought about K9 and Company.
Let's say this now. Let's offer the cast members of K9 and Company come and talk to us. That could be.
Wouldn't that
I
be
don't think we wouldn't need our arm twisting too hard to come back and talk about K9 and Company all over again. After that bombshell, the Hellraiser bombshell, I'm just going to drop my bombshell. I give it 4 out of 5. Thanks for joining us today, JT. You've been a very, very good boy. Who'd have thought that? We'd love to have you back on at some point at a later date, but for now, cheers again. That's the time rotor whirling away, calling time on another Type 40. We'll be back on the leash soon enough with another edition of Type 40, so look out for that wherever you've found this. The brand new Type 40 podcast feed hosted at type40.podbean.com. For example, by popular demand, we've got our very own feed. We're even easier to find, but you can search and find us also over on Apple Podcasts, on iHeartRadio, Stitcher, Google Play, Podbean or Spotify, and don't forget over on YouTube, the world's largest streaming platform. We're still on the Fandom Podcast Network's incredible master feed, of course, with all those other wonderful genre shows. As ever, get in touch through our social medias. Instagram and Twitter at Type40Doctor Who. Even email us, type40doctorwho@gmail.com. And finally, if you're feeling especially brave and fancy some real-time, extra-dimensional chit-chat, step into the Type 40 Facebook group. Simon, what are your own coordinates from Galactic Centre on social media?
Only on Facebook, thank goodness, but you can come and find me there and just look up Doctor Who, The Whonatics, and I am the admin on that, so come and say hello.
And you can find me, I'm scattered across all of space and time, but mostly on Twitter and Instagram as the Spacebook, where I ramble away, posting about whatever catches my eye, imagination, or both in popular culture, inside and outside of the TARDIS. There's links to all of that in the show notes too. We always have the time if you have the space here on Type 40. Thanks for listening, we'll speak to you again soon. Type 40, a Doctor Who podcast, is a Spacebook production for the Fandom Podcast Network with music by Problem Being.